Imagine showing up to a modern political protest.
Okay.
You're there advocating for human rights, democratic elections, a hopeful tomorrow.
Right. The usual things you'd expect at a pro-democracy rally.
Exactly. And you look at the people marching next to you, and they are, well, proudly wearing black Italian fascist-style shirts.
Wow.
Yeah. And then you see what they're actually waving. It's not a symbol of a new future at all.
What is it?
It's the flag of a notoriously brutal, historical, secret police force. And that is exactly what happened recently at a protest in Germany.
I mean, that is just a jarring image. Protests are, fundamentally about projecting a vision for the future.
Right.
So watching a group publicly embrace the authoritarian iconography of the past, well, it tells you something very specific about the political climate they want to create.
It really does. So welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're taking you on a journey into a very dark, very complex chapter of history that's suddenly colliding with the present day.
Yeah, we're unpacking a highly charged, politically dense interview from a Persian radio broadcast called Radio Irava.
Right, featuring Dr. Hossain Jahansouz. And he's basically breaking down the controversial legacy of Iran's historical secret police, SAVAK, and how that legacy is completely fracturing modern Iranian opposition politics.
But before we go any further, we really need to pause and make a crucial clarification for you, the listener.
Yes, absolutely.
The source material we're examining today, it contains very strong, highly partisan political views regarding the Iranian government, historical monarchies, and specific opposition groups.
Yeah, and we, as your hosts, we are impartially reporting on the factual claims and the narratives presented in this original broadcast.
Exactly. We absolutely do not endorse or take sides on any of these viewpoints.
No, not at all. Our mission is simply to break down this source material so you can understand the exact ideas and arguments being circulated within this specific political sphere.
Okay, so let's unpack this.
Yeah, the supporters at that German protest, they were rallying behind Reza Pahlavi, right? The son of Iran's former Shah.
Correct.
Why on earth would a modern political movement, one that's trying to gain traction, proudly wave the banner of SAVAK?
Well, Dr. Jahansouz, he views this not as a bold strategy, but as a total political disaster.
Really?
Yeah. He actually refers to it in the broadcast as a suicide.
A suicide, wow.
Yeah, because from his perspective, these Pahlavi supporters have just stopped trying to hide their authoritarian culture.
Ah.
By putting on those black shirts and waving that specific flag, they're signaling to the world exactly what kind of regime they would operate if they ever regained power.
But Jahansouz doesn't seem to think they ever will regain power, though, right?
No, not at all.
Because he uses this incredibly vivid analogy in the interview. He says the idea of Reza Pahlavi returning to Iran as Shah is so impossible, you would have better luck trying to ride a bicycle to Mars.
I love that analogy. He literally thinks the interplanetary bike trip is more realistic.
That's hilarious. But how does he back that up?
Well, he backs up the claim by looking at the actual reality on the ground inside Iran. He argues that the Pahlavi movement lacks any real, organized footprint where it actually matters.
Okay.
The true counterforce, according to Jahansouz, is a deeply entrenched network of resistance.
He's talking about the Mujahideen, right?
Exactly, the Mujahideen, which has historically been the primary opposition group, and specifically their local rebel units.
And the broadcast paints these rebel units as having a massive scale.
Yeah, it emphasizes both their scale and their international legitimacy. Jahansouz points out that this resistance has the backing of, 500 parliamentarians across the globe.
Wow, that's huge.
And over 100 Nobel laureates, too.
Seriously?
Yeah, but the core of his argument really rests on their ultimate sacrifice. He contrasts the Pahlavi supporters, playing dress-up in Germany, with a harrowing recent event inside Iran.
What happened?
6 members of these rebel units were executed in Gizl-Hizar prison. And just moments before they were put to death, they sang freedom songs.
That is incredibly powerful.
It is. Jahansouz uses that event to illustrate just this unwavering faith in their cause, noting that this opposition group has allegedly lost 120,000 lives in the fight for Iranian freedom.
Let me play devil's advocate here for a second, though, because if we look at this from the outside, if Pahlavi's movement is as impossible as a bicycle trip to Mars, why are they gaining so much visibility?
It's a fair question.
Right. I mean, they're organizing these protests with stages, massive banners, and an undeniable physical presence. It reminds me of a loud but empty stadium.
Okay, how so?
Like if you give a megaphone to a few fans in the front row, they can make it sound like the bleachers are packed, even if the rest of the arena is completely deserted.
Right, right.
Is this visibility just like artificial amplification?
Your stadio analogy perfectly captures Jahansouz's theory, actually.
Yeah.
He firmly believes this visibility is artificially manufactured.
Okay. By who?
Well, he describes Pahlavi as essentially acting as a parrot, just repeating lines given to him by external forces.
Interesting.
Jahansouz argues that foreign colonial powers and even the current regime's own intelligence ministry.
Wait, the Moy?
Yes, the Moyas. He claims they are deliberately amplifying Pahlavi's movement to divide the true opposition.
Oh, that makes sense, because if you can prop up a highly polarizing figure who alienates everyday citizens by waving SAVAK flags...
Exactly. You fracture the unified resistance against the current regime.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. To really understand why waving that flag is such a polarizing, visceral trigger, we have to look at what this organization actually was.
Right. The history of SAVAK is incredibly dark.
When did SAVAK even begin?
So we have to travel back to the Iranian calendar year 1335, which translates to 1956.
Okay, so a few years after the 1953 coup.
Exactly, 3 years after. The immediate catalyst for SAVAK's creation was actually a protest during a visit to Tehran by U.S. Vice President Richard Nixon.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, 3 students were killed protesting that visit. And in the aftermath, the Shah's regime realized they needed a permanent, dedicated mechanism to identify and completely crush any anti-monarchy political forces.
A dedicated mechanism? That sounds terrifying.
It was. And it wasn't just a homegrown operation either. Jahansouz states that SAVAK was built from the ground up with the direct training and logistical help of the CIA and Mossad.
So what was actually happening inside those interrogation rooms? I mean, when we talk about crushing political forces, what kind of systemic violence are we talking about here?
The interview provides several highly specific, gruesome accounts to really ground this history in human reality.
Look what?
One of the victims mentioned is Fatima Amini. She was a member of the Mujahideen. When she was arrested, interrogators demanded the locations of resistance safe houses.
Right.
And when she refused to break, they placed her on a metal bed positioned directly over a live electric stove.
Oh my God, that's horrific.
It gets worse. The broadcast cites a surgeon who later examined her in an emergency room. This was a doctor accustomed to seeing terrible industrial accidents and self-immolations.
Yeah.
Yet she testified that she had never seen burns as deep as the ones inflicted on Fatima Amini.
The level of cruelty there is just, it's difficult to process.
It really is. And another account details the fate of Ali Asghar Badazadgan, who was burned so severely during his interrogation that he was completely paralyzed.
Paralyzed from burns.
Yeah. The guards literally could not move him between different sections of the prison.
That is just sickening.
Then you have Mehdi Rezai, who was only 19 years old.
Just a kid.
Right. And during his torture, a high-ranking SAVAK official named Parviz Sabeti allegedly urinated directly into the teenager's mouth.
Wow. And the torture extended to family members too, didn't it?
It did, yeah. The broadcast highlights a woman referred to as Mother Aziz from the Rezai family. Her only crime was that her children were members of the resistance.
Guilt by association.
Exactly. She was subjected to a torture technique involving heavy cables. And the torturers actually had a morbid, rhyming nickname for this.
What was it?
They called it shalakalak, which translates roughly to creative whipping.
Creative whipping. That's so sick.
The cables tore the flesh from her body all the way to the bone. Years later, as the wounds finally healed, the flesh reattached in a way that left permanent, lumpy scars covering her body.
How does the state apparatus justify institutionalizing that level of sadism? I mean, what is the psychology of someone who comes up with a rhyming nickname for tearing a mother's flesh to the bone?
Well, what's fascinating here is how Jahansouz analyzes the mindset of the torturers. He points out that this wasn't random, chaotic violence.
Right, it was systemic.
Exactly, a deeply systematic process. The torturers viewed extreme violence as an absolute justifiable necessity.
Because they were protecting the state.
Right. The underlying philosophy of SAVAK was the survival of the Shah at any cost. And when regime survival becomes the only metric of success, well, every single moral boundary regarding human rights just vanishes.
If the violence was this systematic, someone had to be designing the system.
Oh, definitely.
Let's trace the architects of this fear. who is actually running SAVAK?
It was a revolving door of directors, honestly, and examining their fates reveals just how paranoid the entire apparatus was.
Okay, who was his first?
The founder was a man named Taimur Bakhtiar. After falling out with the Shah, Bakhtiar fled to Iraq, where he was eventually tracked down and assassinated by the very spies he had helped train.
Wow, the ultimate backfire.
Yeah, his successor was Hossain, whose story contains one of the most brutal ironies in modern history.
How so?
During his tenure as the head of SAVAK, Pakhrvan actually intervened to save Ayatollah Khomeini from being executed by the state.
He saved Khomeini's life.
Yes. But then after the 1979 revolution, when Khomeini came to absolute power, he had Pakhrvan executed.
The man who saved his life. That's wild.
Right. And following him was Ni'matullah NCRI, who ran SAVAK for 12 years.
Okay. What happened to him?
Eventually, as international pressure mounted and SAVAK's reputation became too toxic for the regime to handle, the Shah tried to politically distance himself by shipping NCRI off to Pakistan to serve as an ambassador.
But Parviz Sabeti is the figure mentioned in this broadcast who really ties this history to the present moment, right?
Yes, absolutely.
He was the head of SAVAK's 3rd Division, responsible for internal security, and he didn't just fade into the history books. He recently surfaced at protests in the United States, specifically in Florida.
Yeah, and that public reappearance has triggered a massive legal reckoning. A civil lawsuit is set to start in February 2025 in a Chicago courtroom.
In Chicago?
Yeah. 3 survivors of SAVAK torture are suing Sabeti for crimes committed half a century ago.
I mean, suing a former secret police chief is incredibly dangerous. How are they protecting themselves?
The plaintiffs are using pseudonyms, which is pretty rare in a civil suit. But the judge allowed it because their legal team successfully argued their lives are in active danger.
What proof did they have of that?
They pointed to the recent assassination of an Iranian dissident named Masoud Majuri in Canada. They used that as proof that the network of former regime loyalists remains lethal.
I imagine Sabeti's defense team immediately tried to get the case thrown out based on a statute of limitations, right? I mean, the events happened in the 1970s.
They absolutely tried to run the clock out, but legal precedent took center stage. The judge rejected Sabeti's argument, ruling that crimes against humanity simply do not have a statute of limitations.
Really?
Yeah. The legal logic here is compared to the hunting down of Holocaust perpetrators decades after the fact. You cannot evade accountability for systemic torture just by moving to the American suburbs and waiting 50 years.
So we've established that SAVAK was a terrifying institution, and the survivors are still fighting for justice today. But this raises a massive question. If the reality of SAVAK was this horrific, why doesn't the modern Iranian public know the full extent of it? Why is there enough historical amnesia for people to wave that flag in Germany?
That question brings us to the core thesis of Jahansouz's interview, which is the concept of the crown versus the turban.
Crown versus turban, what does that mean?
He argues that the historical monarchy and the current clerical regime are not ideological opposites. They are simply 2 sides of the exact same dictatorial coin.
Okay, so one replaced the other, but the system of oppression stayed the same.
Right. To illustrate that the new regime was just as ruthless as the old one, he points to the year 1981, claiming the current regime executed 30,000 people that year simply for voicing support for the opposition leader.
It's like, think about it like a completely corrupt corporation.
Okay.
The executives are embezzling, exploiting the workers, the whole 9 yards. Finally, a new management team stages a hostile takeover.
Right.
You would expect the new team to immediately publish the old team's cooked books to prove to the public how bad the old guys were.
Yeah, you'd want to expose them.
But what if, instead of publishing the books, the new management locks them in a basement vault? Usually that happens because the new team was secretly on the old team's payroll. If they expose the old corruption, they expose their own complicity.
Your analogy perfectly mirrors the historical claim Jahansouz makes regarding the SAVAK archives.
Really?
Yes. After the 1979 revolution, the clerics seized millions of SAVAK internal documents. And instead of creating a Truth and Reconciliation Commission or releasing the files to the press, they completely buried them.
Because they were implicated.
Exactly. Jahansouz claims that top clerics in the current regime were actually receiving secret financial salaries from the Shah's endowment office prior to the revolution.
Oh, wow.
He argues that the clerics quickly executed former SAVAK heads, like NCRI, not just to enact revolutionary justice, but to permanently silence the men who knew about those financial ties. They locked away the archives to protect their own legitimacy.
So the Iranian people were completely robbed of the truth. They never got to see the files.
No, they didn't.
But Jahansouz shares a personal anecdote in the broadcast that gives us a chilling glimpse into just how pervasive that surveillance state was on a day-to-day basis.
It is a striking story. Before the revolution, Jahansouz was working as a high school chemistry teacher in a city called Quechan.
Oh.
He was just doing his job, teaching science to teenagers. And one day, he discovers that the school principal has installed an intercom system directly inside his classroom.
An intercom.
Yeah. And when Jahansouz questioned him about it, the principal played it off, claiming it was just for convenience so the teacher wouldn't have to walk down the hall to the main office.
But Jahansouz knew exactly what it was, right?
Yeah.
It was a live microphone placed there by SAVAK to monitor every single word spoken by the teachers and the students.
Right.
Imagine trying to teach the periodic table knowing the secret police are actively listening to ensure no one says anything remotely anti-monarchy.
It is the absolute definition of a surveillance state.
Yeah.
And the tragedy of that specific classroom doesn't end there either.
What happened?
Jahansouz notes that several of those very students from his chemistry class, the kids sitting in that monitored room, were later executed by the current clerical regime after the revolution.
Oh, that's devastating.
Yeah. They were prisoners of the Shah, and then they became victims of the clerics.
If both the historical monarchy and the current religious regime are inherently corrupt dictatorships, what is the alternative? How does Jahansouz define what true freedom is actually supposed to look like?
Well, he starts by redefining the word freedom itself.
Okay.
Supporters of the old monarchy often point out that under the Shah, people had the freedom to go to a cabaret in Tehran, grab a drink, and socialize.
Sure, social freedoms.
But Jahansouz counters that by drawing a hard line between social permissions and true political freedom. Going to a club is meaningless if you have a secret police microphone hidden in your high school chemistry class.
That's a great point.
If you can dance at a cabaret but get tortured with a live electric stove for questioning the government's authority, you aren't actually free.
So what is the blueprint for the future then? The National Council of Resistance of Iran, or the NCRI, has a proposed solution, but I want to push back on it because it sounds almost too idealistic.
Okay, let's hear it.
They're proposing a strictly 6-month transitional period. Is that realistic? I mean, history shows us that power vacuums usually invite more dictators. Politicians don't just voluntarily give up power.
Jahansouz defends the NCRI charter by emphasizing its strict self-limiting mandate. According to the blueprint, the council intends to take power solely to pry it out of the hands of the current regime.
Okay, then what?
They facilitate democratic elections and physically transfer power back to the Iranian people. And the process is designed to take a maximum of 6 months.
Just 6 months?
Yes. The crucial mechanism here is that after those 6 months, the council automatically dissolves. They cease to exist as a governing body.
So they just serve as a temporary bridge.
Furthermore, Jahansouz explains that the interim government will not act as a moral police force. He specifically returns to the cabaret example. He notes that if someone wants to open a cabaret during that transitional period, they can. The Transitional Council will have no executive power to stop them, nor do they want that power.
Got it.
Their only mandate is to ensure the transfer of sovereignty, not to dictate how people live their daily lives.
Well, we have covered incredible ground today. We started with a modern protest in Germany featuring fascist shirts and secret police flags.
Yeah.
We explored the deeply systemic, brutal history of SAVAK through the survival accounts of Fatima Amini and Mother Aziz. We looked at the mechanics of the surveillance state, the upcoming 2025 trial of Parviz Sabeti, and the complex theory that the current regime actively hid the Shah's archives to protect their own financial complicity.
And all of this leading to the NCRI's proposed 6-month transition plan.
Exactly.
Connecting all these threads really leaves us with a profound realization about the nature of history.
What's that?
When a nation undergoes a massive revolution, the victors don't just get to write the future. They gain total, absolute control over the archives of the past.
Oh, wow.
If the clerics truly hid the SAVAK torture files to cover up their own financial ties to the monarchy, we have to ask, what other pieces of history are locked in those basement vaults right now?
Right.
And when those vault doors are finally forced open, how completely will the contents rewrite the way the entire world understands the last 50 years of Iranian history?
That is a question you'll be thinking about long after today. Thank you for joining us on this intense intellectual journey. Keep digging, keep questioning the historical narratives you encounter, and always remember to look closely at who is writing the history and who holds the keys to the archives. Until next time.